Welcome to part 2 of this lecture. I'm Petter Dyndahl. This part is about popular music ubiquity and expanding production of meaning in the late modern period. During the 1990s, scholars such as Richard Peterson, Simon Frith, and Sarah Thornton contributed to the critique and reorientation of popular music scholarship, incorporating concepts related to Bourdieu and social theory. Utilizing empirical evidence, Peterson and his collaborators argue that class-based cultural consumption and taste underwent changes in the United States from the 1980s to the 1990s. While the consumption patterns of the dominant classes had been linked to traditional high culture until the 1980s, in the 1990s, a shift towards a more omnivorous taste occurred, incorporating what had previously been regarded as low culture into the realm of cultural consumption. The development towards cultural omnivorousness, as Peterson termed it, signified the potential of popular culture to serve as cultural capital. This phenomenon appears to align with several of the observed instances and processes outlined in the aforementioned Norwegian context, particularly with regard to the pervasive presence of popular music, even in contexts where its visibility was previously limited. This issue will be further explored later, and I will also provide a critical assessment of Peterson's contribution to the field of cultural sociology. Simon Frith adopted a somewhat different approach, maintaining that popular culture would always mirror the society as a whole, in that similar social mechanisms as those described by Bourdieu at the macro level also applied in this specific subfield. He criticized Bourdieu's overall high-low dichotomy and stated that popular culture itself contains similar spans. According to Frith, the manner in which we comprehend and respond to popular music is largely analogous to our engagement with art music. The distinctions and negotiations surrounding popular music are as significant as they are in any other musical practice. Furthermore, as is the case elsewhere, these distinctions possess both an aesthetic and a cultural dimension, or as Frith asserts, a functional one. Consequently, when engaging with popular music, we simultaneously engage in aesthetic evaluations of its merits and utilize its power as a medium for social construction of ourselves. Frith wrote, quote, "What I want to suggest, in other words, is not that social groups agree on values which are then expressed in their cultural activities, but that they only get to know themselves as groups through cultural activity, through aesthetic judgment. Making music isn't a way of expressing ideas, it's a way of living them." Unquote. Frith sought to deviate from the manner in which, under certain circumstances, Bourdieu's cultural sociology had served to fortify the idea that aesthetic listening was associated with high culture and classical music. Conversely, the cultural significance of popular music was frequently elucidated and legitimized within the context of social functions and the trivial needs for recreation and entertainment. Instead, Frith argued that all music practices should be regarded as signifying practices, that is, activities that engender meaning, sense, and importance, as articulated as well, for better or for worse, in the aforementioned incident of the 22nd July terror attack and the subsequent consolation. In the words of Michel Foucault, such practices can be regarded as a form of hermeneutics of the self, an ethical, self-interpretative, and self-constituting practice that enables subject to function intelligibly within, in this case, aesthetic, cultural, and social discourses. Sarah Thornton argued similarly to Frith that popular culture was incorrectly perceived in a simplified or one-dimensional way. She wrote, "High culture is generally conceived in terms of aesthetic values, hierarchies, and canons, while popular culture is portrayed as a curiously flat folk culture. Consumers of popular culture have been depicted as discerning, with definite likes and dislikes, but these tastes are rarely charted systematically as ranked standards." Unquote. Drawing upon her extensive research on social, cultural, and aesthetic distinctions within the context of the British dance music club scene, Thornton introduced the concept of subcultural capital, a term that is evidently rooted in Bourdieu's theoretical framework. In this way, she demonstrated, in concordance with Frith, that a Bourdieuian understanding of society could be equally pertinent at the micro as at the macro level, and that in the subcultural context, hypnos constituted a high-status form of capital that could be invested and exchanged in numerous popular cultural roles and occupations. The theoretical and empirical approaches outlined here focused on the broader status of popular music, examining whether this genre and the social groupings associated with it in terms of taste and/or identity were integrated into or marginalized within aesthetic, cultural, and social context and structures. A related issue that seemed important in the 1990s, especially for Frith, was whether popular music was recognized as sufficiently significant to provide a way of being in the world, or a way of making sense of its complexity, and not only was considered to be the curiously flat folk culture that Thornton described as the most prevalent. Frith argued that musical experiences connect us to the world at the same time and in the same way as they disconnect us from the world. The paradox, then, is that experiences which are both aesthetic and functional construct us socially and culturally, while simultaneously we imagine that meaning and significance lie in the music, as inherent musical qualities, or as its aesthetic essence. And, according to Frith, this works the same way in popular music, classical music, or any music genre. In other words, different music traditions, genres, and styles are in principle, or if desired ontologically, equal in this sense. However, from a sociological perspective, particularly in the 20th century, these genres have not been regarded as equal. The question therefore arises as to whether the aforementioned field cases demonstrate that popular music has successfully captured many of the domains previously reserved for traditional high culture, at least in a seemingly egalitarian Scandinavian society such as Norway. Alternatively, it could be argued that the dominant classes now find popular music more appropriate for achieving their traditional interests in terms of status, hegemony, and power in a subtler way. It is possible that both approaches are valid. A seminal contribution to the field of music sociology that explores the late modern condition is Matti Regev's 2013 book Pop Rock Music, Aesthetic Cosmopolitanism in Late Modernity. In this book, Regev posits the notion of a global proliferation of popular culture, particularly popular music, within the broader and multifaceted paradigm he terms pop rockization. This phenomenon, according to Regev, is characterized by an increase in the number of pop rock styles and a tendency for pop rock music to hybridize with other styles and genres. Consequently, Reggae asserts that pop rock constitutes a dominant force in contemporary music, compelling other musical genres to adopt and implement elements and practices from it. From the perspective of cultural consumers and audiences, reggae claims that the compound field of popular music serves as a global common ground for sharing aesthetic perceptions, expressive forms, and cultural practices in late modernity. He wrote, quote, "While in the past, national cultural uniqueness was organized around the principle of striving towards totally different expressive forms and stylistic elements, with expressive isomorphism, it becomes organized around proximity, similitude, and overlap of art forms and stylistic elements between nations." Unquote. It is relatively straightforward to detect similar features in the above examples from Norwegian academic and educational institutions, from cultural policies, and from the media and the public sphere. Popular music has gradually become a naturalized and significant part of all these contexts, and few people are still skeptical of the claim that popular music has become an important part of higher music education and music in school. It seems as if popular culture has simply become legitimate culture. In the Scandinavian context, cultural policy has historically been grounded in the notion of an expanded cultural concept, and the exclusion of popular culture and vernacular forms of expression from cultural funding and support would face immediate criticism from both the traditional left and the new right-wing populist parties. Furthermore, popular music in contemporary society, in both its positive or negative aspects, appears to articulate and make sense of the most sincere and emotional facets of being human, as well as attending and producing meaning for the entire spectrum of life events, from personal and collective rituals and rites to public and private ceremonies. Reggae's theoretical framework draws upon a range of approaches, notably including Bruno Latour's actor network theory. However, within this context, it's equally noteworthy how he facilitates the intersection of his key concepts with Bourdieu's theoretical framework. For instance, his concept of expressive isomorphism refers to the manner in which a musical social field, in a sense that aligns with Bourdieu's theoretical framework, is shaped by processes of standardization that result in the adaptation or replacement of national and/or ethnic uniqueness with cosmopolitan aesthetics, styles, and idioms that exhibit similar but not identical features in the context of popular music. In contrast, institutionalized patterns of cultural value indicate what popular music forms, stylistic elements, and aesthetic idioms may be emphasized to count as various forms of cultural capital in the field. Although one may take from this that the concept of aesthetic cosmopolitanism denotes a comparatively conflict-oriented view of society, as Bourdieu suggests, it has been criticized by Jason Toynbee for implicitly considering popular music as a reconciliation of the contradiction between cultural particularity and universality. Reggae's position is that music genuinely expresses contemporary indigenous, national, or ethnic cultures. However, he also describes aesthetic cosmopolitanism as the ongoing formation in late modernity of world culture as one intricate, interconnected entity in which social groupings of all types around the globe increasingly share broad common grounds. Moreover, Rege's work identifies a correlation between the rise of aesthetic cosmopolitanism and the pursuit of social and cultural distinction by the dominant classes. Specifically, he highlights how specific segments of the middle and upper classes adopt diverse cultural practices to establish their sense of distinction, emphasizing their affinity for the new and innovative. He further elaborates on how, in their consumption practices, these individuals reject essentialist purism, instead embracing openness and diversity. Consequently, the aesthetic cosmopolitan ideal is inextricably linked to the development of omnivorous tastes within and across various cultural forms. However, Toynbee maintains that Rege's analysis only identifies the class nature of aesthetic cosmopolitanism, but does not delve into its exploration. In order to follow up on these issues of cultural consumption and social class, in the next part I will examine some of the cultural sociological concepts presented here, as well as others, in more detail.
People try to take my soul away, but I don't hear the rap that they all say. They try to tell us we don't belong. That's alright, we're a million strong. This is my music, it makes me proud. These are my people and this is my crowd. These are crazy, crazy